Vertical and hypermobility is amazingly fun. As an experienced player, I can give my opinion very accurately as to the fact that people love, when they know how to use it, being able to traverse across large open spaces in games that are competitive like this. It allows the better players to traverse the spaces more efficiently, more effectively, and utilize them as ways to initiate and escape attacks with relative ease. As someone who loves Bomb King and Eevee, the reductions to hyper and vertical mobility on these champions can seem overwhelming at first and almost seem like the champions are losing their identity. But I don't think this is the case. And in fact, for Paladins, I think this could be an incredibly eye-opening and wondrously expansive experience that allows new champions, new metas, and of course, new ideas to develop and take precedent in the realm. Today, let's have a conversation about vertical mobility, hypermobility, why it should be used, when it should be used, and when it shouldn't be, and where some of these OB54 changes may, although seemingly detract from some of the playstyle options of champions, but actually give more options to the champions that are said to be losing that hypermobility, and also give more options to the current roster and future iterations of champions in the long run. To set the stage, let's talk about what hyper and vertical mobility actually are. Mobility is the ability to be mobile. It's the opportunity a champion has in their kit to traverse open spaces and close distance. What this does is allow champions who need to get into a certain position to be effective to get into that position more easily. A lot of times, such as champions with Eevee, this is core to their kit. Being able to get to an open space or get to the back line, aggress onto the target that they need to, is a functional part of being a flanker, and how she does her job is by having two mobility skills that allow her to get there and then get out safely. Hypermobility is just the extreme version of that, where in comparison to the other champions in the roster or comparison to the tasks that they need to complete, they have more mobility than they need, allowing not only their kits to be sufficient in doing their job, but to be overly sufficient, to be overly safe, to be overly effective in traversing space. But is that an egregious thing? Somebody having a little bit more movement skill or a lot more movement skill than they need to do their job? Let's take a look at some of the repercussions of what happens if that's the case. Let's take a look at Bomb King, for example, a champion who not only has incredible crowd control with his Grumpy Bomb, his ultimate does thousands of damage in a very wide area and also stuns as well, and he has some of the highest and most accurate burst potential in the game, being able to not only hit for 900, but to detonate those bombs at any time he sees fit, even mid-air. This champion fulfills the role of a damage class just like that, but he also has an incredible movement skill called Poppy Bomb, which allows him to burst himself up into the air and over large distances. With the legendary card Accelerant, this distance was absolutely incredible that he was able to travel, meaning that Bomb King could be in the back line throwing damage, throwing a Grumpy Bomb, and being safe away from you, and immediately landing on top of you within a matter of seconds. Why would I pick a flanker when I have a damage dealer who could provide all the tools that I need in terms of damage and also outmaneuver any flanker that I would pick up? Because he's a damage dealer, he's got 2600 health versus a flanker who would have maybe 1800 to 2000. He's got more burst damage than a flank, and he also has more control than almost any other champion in the game. Of course, in OB54, the Accelerant legendary has been removed and replaced to allow his Grumpy Bomb to explode 50% faster. But I bring up this change because I think Accelerant is a great example of hypermobility, not only because it allows him to traverse long distances very quickly, but also because it allows him to fulfill a role outside of his intended role. That mobility not only allowed him to jump over long distances, it allowed him to jump over the damage class and be a flanker if he wanted to. And even as a guy who loves Bomb King and has played Bomb King more than any other champion in Paladins in my history of the game, I realize this creates some serious issues. Why would I pick anyone besides Bomb King if he's available? Even if they're more suited for the role, they're designed for that role, if he's able to have this extra benefit of this insane mobility and kind of bridge the gap between classes. It inherently delegitimizes flankers, and it also puts everyone else in a precarious situation. If someone on the enemy team has that type of mobility, I've got to pick the other champion that can compete with that. And because of the fact that there are several champions who can, but not all of them, we see a majority of the same champions continuously picked. And although it's partly a result of habit, it's also partly a result of the necessity to be able to compete with what they're having to play against. Imagine having a high school basketball team of mostly seniors and juniors, but a few freshmen and sophomores mixed in. You want to let the sophomores and freshmen play so they can develop and obviously take the roles of the juniors and seniors in the upcoming seasons. But when you play against the best team in the league, who do you play? You play your seniors and your juniors, otherwise you know you're going to lose. What happens is when you play a Bomb King or a Drogos or an Eevee, these champions with incredible mobility, what do you have to do in order to beat them? Immediately, champions who cannot contend with their mobility hypermobility are put to the wayside, and other champions that at least can stay airborne or have different aspects of their kit that are equally beneficial to that mobility get picked up instead. A Victor into an Eevee is almost an unthinkable pick. It just doesn't work out very often for the Victor, and so another pick will be forced because that will be more easily able to contend with Eevee or Bomb King's mobility. Just like the freshmen and sophomores will see no game time against the best opponent in the league because the juniors and seniors are the only ones who are really able to compete at that level. And at the end of the day, you can't get rid of freshmen and sophomores. You can't get rid of champions who sometimes don't have hypermobility or designed with ways who just are normal. They're not flying through the air. They don't have this access to this egregious movement. Zen is a great flanker, but hasn't been played very often due to the fact that he doesn't have the same amount of movement as an Androxus or an Eevee in the flank role. He doesn't have as much mobility. He doesn't have vertical mobility except on his ultimate, so why would I pick him over a champion who could easily traverse any area in all areas at any time much more quickly and be just as effective as taking someone down? In my opinion, this is the area that hypermobility gets us into when we look at designing future champions and we look at dealing with the issues of what it brings to the meta. Champions that can contend. Champions that can't get left by the wayside. And for teams who want to compete at a high level and players who want to get better, that will ultimately become the choice they have to make. Otherwise, it'll be like fielding a bunch of freshmen and sophomores against senior and junior players. You start your game at a disadvantage. But what happens when those sophomores and those freshmen actually start playing against other sophomores and freshmen? Or in more general terms, what happens when the playing field is level? Not only can you play more champions, you can actually be more diverse with your strategies. Different things become more important. It's not just height and physical strength and experience, it's positioning, it's timing, it's skill. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest benefits of reducing the hypermobility of certain champions and bringing them more into line with the rest of the roster, allowing for the diversification of both champion choices and tactics from high-level teams and casual players alike. Different bans, different picks allow the metas to continuously shift and become more fluid, creating a collage of different opportunities within the spectrum of play. But what does this mean from a design perspective as well? As I mentioned earlier, Zen is one of the most fun and I think most well-liked champions to be released in Paladins in a long time. He's super anime and people love that about him, and he's also extremely fun and visceral to play. He's very active, he requires skill to be really good at, and a lot of precognition in terms of outplaying your opponents. Yet he's rarely touched in high-level Paladins esports. And it's not because the pros don't like him. They love Zen. They like playing Zen. He is a ton of fun, and they've got a lot of practice on him, but it's just because Androxus, Eevee, Bomb King were better picks to do the same job. And the real difference there is that all of those champions have incredible access to mobility, both hyper and vertical alike, whereas Zen doesn't. What this means is that a champion who is extremely popular, extremely successful in both casual and pro communities cannot see the light of play because he can't contend with what was already in existence beforehand. So let me ask you this, what happens when another great champion comes out who just doesn't have as much vertical mobility or hypermobility as those other champions? Continuing down the same path, I'm sure we would see very similar results where, although they're fun, although they're very interesting, unless they had a game-breaking mechanic like everybody dies when they enter the battlefield, if we're looking at the flank role, they still probably wouldn't be prioritized, maybe not even played. Not only is this upsetting for new ideas and brand new characters that are very interesting and unique, but also extremely limiting, creating a very difficult design decision saying, I want to make this character that does something different, that plays a different role, that can spice things up, but I know that if I don't add vertical mobility or hypermobility, he won't get played. Ultimately, what this leads to is the homogenization of Paladins champions, which is something that nobody wants. Nobody wants the same old champion over and over again, dressed in a different way. We want unique things. But having this vertical mobility in the game means that they have to climb that ladder. They have to actually be able to compete in that extremely valuable particular asset, otherwise they won't see the light of day. Although this particularly applies to the damage and flank role, I think this also applies somewhat to other classes as well. When we see champions who have incredible amounts of healing or the ability to defend a point by themselves as a solo frontliner, it can become difficult to pick anybody else because of the fact that they do their job so well. And although I'm of a mind to usually buff champions rather than to nerf them so they can all contend with each other, I do think that if there are any outliers, which I think clearly were here with Bomb King, with Eevee, with Androxus, being able to still keep them mobile but not hyper mobile will allow new champion choices, new champion designs to come to fruition in the realm and be successful. Eevee, Androxus, and Bomb King are my three favorite champions. I mean, trust me, if you guys have seen me stream or you look at my champion masteries, those three are basically the highest that I have. So if you're worried about, hey, this doesn't feel as fun, I'm worried about their lack of mobility, I mean, I'm the guy who basically could sympathize with you the most. But I also think it would be a shame if the next 5 flankers that came out never got played because they just didn't have as much mobility as those other two. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually like the other legendary choices that have been added in OB54. For all of the updates on that, or maybe some more coverage, I might do another video, but of course you can check forums.paladins.com, check out the patch patch notes and see what you think. All in all, I think mobility is one of the most valued and one of the most fun aspects of a first-person shooter, especially in Paladins, and I want to see champions still added with great, unique, and awesome ways to get around the battlefield. But I think when mobility is too valuable, when it becomes a have to because of other champions who have such a large amount of it are being played consistently at the high level, then you lose a little bit of variability and you lose some of the, I think, future design opportunities for your game to really make itself unique and make itself marketable to everyone of all different types of playing styles. Thus, in OB54, I'm looking forward to how these changes will adjust the meta. A lot of pros have already commented on the fact that this is exciting, that this is changing everything, and this is a really good change for casual players, for high-level ranked players, and for Paladins esports players as we look towards the future. But even more importantly, I want to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments section below how you feel about the vertical mobility and kind of hypermobility conversation that I've brought up today. Are you excited about the changes in OB54 and interested in the new meta shifts and what that'll bring to Paladins, or maybe are you a little worried? Let me know either way in the comment section below so we can continue the conversation. I love the way you guys show up and support in these videos. Again, thank you so much, Notification Squad, for being early. Everybody a part of Raynday Gaming already, thank you so much. And if you want to join, hit the subscribe button right now to stay tuned to every single piece of content that I post here on my YouTube channel. As always, remember to never give up, never stop gaming, and I'll see you all next time.